The man, whose eyes bulged like brass bells, advanced slowly through a hail of bullets. His body was already riddled with holes. Eventually, he fell. The man watching him fall to the ground laughed triumphantly. At that moment, the wind started howling, and a blood moon appeared. His body began to rapidly heal. In no time, this man named Alucard was fully revived. The story takes place last century in a remote village where women kept disappearing near a church, casting a pall of death over the entire village. Following clues, the police soon arrived in front of the church. Under the dim light, they saw a priest gnawing on the body of a woman. But in the next second, many zombies burst out of the church, all lunging at the police. Despite being armed, their weapons were useless against such foes. Headquarters, upon receiving the message, immediately sought help from Hellsing, an organization specialized in dealing with supernatural entities. Hellsing's leader, Integra, had already dispatched her ace, known as the King of Vampires, Alucard. At that moment, policewoman Seras was hanging by a thread. The only survivor among the investigating officers, Seras was brutally grabbed by the priest who couldn't wait to assault her. Suddenly, an oppressive presence filled the air. When he came to his senses, he saw Alucard standing before him. The seasoned priest recognized him instantly as a vampire but couldn't understand why he willingly served humans. The evil priest merely gestured, and all the ghouls fired together. Alucard's body was instantly riddled with bullets, his arms shot off. Seeing this, the priest laughed heartily, thinking he had completely eliminated his enemy. But then, a mocking laugh echoed as the moon turned blood red. Countless wisps of black smoke converged on Alucard, and his mutilated body began to heal. The revived Alucard seemed even stronger. With a wave of his hand, a specially made 13mm silver cross spear appeared. In an instant, Alucard transformed into the messenger of hell, and all the ghouls were instantly killed. The desperate priest, driven to despair, took policewoman Seras as a hostage. Unconventionally, Alucard asked Seras if she was a virgin. Upon receiving an affirmative answer, Alucard shot and completely eliminated the priest. Seras was also accidentally hit in the lung, and her life quickly ebbed away. Yet, with her parents' vengeance unfulfilled, she unwillingly stretched out her arm. Before collapsing, Alucard grasped her small palm. When Seras awoke, she found herself not dead, but now possessed 2 sharp fangs, and by misfortune, she became a member of Hellsing. He is the strongest force of Iscariot, Vatican Section 13, the spokesperson for divine punishment on Earth, known in the dark world as the King of Gun and Sword. This knight named Anderson, an ace in dealing with dark creatures, coldly descended the steps, his blood-stained knife gleaming coldly in the dark. He approached Alucard step by step. A battle between aces was about to begin. Just recently, Alucard and Seras, under the orders of the Hellsing organization, set out to eliminate a rampaging vampire. Seras, newly transformed into a vampire, under Alucard's personal demonstration, strove to overcome her inner discomfort, continuously killing a large number of ghouls. Stimulated by the scent of blood, her eyes turned blood red. Eventually, she crushed the last ghoul underfoot. Suddenly, a sharp sword pierced through Seras, and then more swords thoroughly impaled her. These swords were blessed gunblades, their hilts shimmering with runes capable of inflicting great damage to the Nightbreed. Immediately after, countless charms flew to every corner, and a barrier sealed off the area. Alucard knew that the church had arrived. Facing this opponent, the noble and handsome Alucard, dressed in splendid red, walked straight towards this intensely oppressive paladin. After they crossed paths, Paladin Anderson quickly turned and plunged 2 swords into Alucard's body. Alucard, far from defenseless, responded by shooting Anderson in the head. However, this was hardly a severe injury for the fallen Anderson. Taking advantage of Alucard's momentary distraction, he leaped up and stabbed Alucard with 2 more swords. Surprised, Alucard launched a fierce counterattack, and a grand battle of guns and swords unfolded. Anderson charged directly at Alucard, who dodged and fired several shots, while Anderson also launched a fierce counterattack. Ultimately, in a flash, Anderson's thrown sword riddled Alucard with holes, and with one final strike, blood splattered as Alucard's head was severed. The victorious Anderson laughed wildly and turned to finish off Seras, only to realize she had already fled with Alucard's head. The wounded Seras didn't get far before Anderson caught up. Alucard's head was also nailed to a wall. Anderson continued to close in on Seras, who was blocked by the barrier and had nowhere to escape. At that moment, his head also turned into fresh blood. Alucard had her drink the blood to become a true vampire. Seras hesitated. She was not yet ready to become a true vampire. Fortunately, Integra arrived in time to save her. In Anderson's eyes, all night creatures must be eradicated. No one could stop him. Integra disdainfully remarked as countless bats flew around that the strongest vampire, created by the Hellsing family over centuries, would not die so easily. Thus, he revived. Disbelieving, Anderson severed Alucard's arms, but in an instant, Alucard fully recovered. Knowing he could not kill Alucard, Paladin Anderson could only teleport away. Who allowed the Vampire King Alucard to unleash his previously sealed powerful Cromwell restraint formula? In the endless darkness, he manifested countless crimson eyes, summoning the bloodthirsty Baroque werewolf's minions, releasing a terrifying aura. Unable to suppress their devouring desire, they fiercely pounced on the already terrified enemies. The collapsing enemies had their legs broken and fell at the exit steps. Alucard was disappointed. He had thought this Class A vampire might bring him a bit of fun, but it turned out to be utterly weak, leaving him feeling uninterested. Alucard once again unleashed the werewolves, completely overwhelming the mentally shattered enemy. Just before this, a man named Luke, at the Hellsing organization's headquarters entrance, merely snapped his fingers, and the guards were shot in the head. He and his brother John led an armed ghoul squad to begin an assault on Hellsing's headquarters. At this moment, Integra is chairing a round-table meeting with 12 influential individuals, including royal nobles, to discuss the frequent vampire incidents. She has discovered that each vampire eliminated had a transmitter on them, and concludes that a mysterious organization must be orchestrating everything. Just as she finishes speaking, the security room reports a massive ghoul invasion at headquarters. Facing the formidable firepower of the fully armed undead ghouls and the vampire John wielding 2 submachine guns, the security team is forced to retreat, powerless to respond. Eventually, the security room is overrun. Integra watches in fury as the bodies of her team members are devoured by ghouls, and Jan licks the fresh blood. She contacts her butler, Walter, and orders him to quickly eliminate the enemy, sparing none. Walter splits their forces into 2 groups. He and Seras head to the 3rd floor meeting room to protect Integra and the round table dignitaries, while the Vampire King, Alucard, is enough on his own to eliminate all invaders. The vampire Luke, guided by the aura emitted by Alucard, locks onto his location and starts to close in. Despite numerous traps, Luke easily evades them. The approaching security team, under his swift and lightning-fast attacks, is brutally slaughtered in moments. Luke then finds the entrance to the basement where he has been waiting for a long time. In the deep underground, they both draw guns, and 2 dull roars of gunfire echo. Both are shot in the head, but as vampires, this is hardly an injury for them. They rise and begin a frenzied shootout. Luke dodges every bullet, while Alucard does not bother to move, showing the disparity in their strength. In their initial encounter, Alucard relishes the long-missed joy of battle, smiling grimly as blood flows freely, then unleashes his full power, devouring Luke, who becomes part of his river of death. Walter, the Hellsing family butler, known as the strongest human reaper, wields flexible wire weapons capable of apocalyptic destruction. In his youth, he could easily shred 100-meter concrete buildings with his metal wires, invisible to the naked eye. Even the ferocious Baroque werewolf is but a whimpering puppy before him. Seeing Walter and Seras arrive just in time through the ventilation ducts at the 3rd floor meeting room, the hearts of the round table dignitaries are finally set at ease. After all, the reputation of Reaper Walter is enough to deter any petty villain. Jan, leading the armed ghouls, has already approached the meeting room. Walter steps out, and with a slight movement of his hand, his shimmering wire and the aura of death leap towards the enemy. Jan's cigar is split in 2, and the ghouls wearing bulletproof vests behind him are instantly slaughtered. A cold sweat breaks out on Jan as he orders the ghouls to open fire frantically, but the dense barrage of bullets cannot stop Walter's advancing steps. Jan, embracing his madness, calls for the ghouls holding bulletproof shields to form an impenetrable formation and charge forward. It's time to call for heavy artillery to sweep the area. Seras, armed with a heavy cannon, fires a shell that, with a thunderous roar, annihilates all ghouls in its trajectory. Then, under Walter's command, Seras switches to armor-piercing incendiary rounds and fires again at the ghouls. Jan, wielding dual guns, rushes forward planning to kill Seras first, blatantly underestimating Death Reaper Walter. Walter blocked him and precisely removed his lip piercing. Just as Seras was about to deal with Jan, ghoul reinforcements arrived. These were all ghouls transformed from the police squad. Jan took the opportunity to break free from the policewoman's control, retreating into the group of ghouls that had been the defense forces. Then he rushed towards the conference hall, bravely facing Walter's sharp steel wires, sacrificing one arm to burst in, prepared to wreak havoc, but instead he was met with countless bullets. Seras, unable to bring herself to strike her former comrades, exploded under the siege of ghouls. Her eyes turned blood red, and she furiously killed all the ghouls. Fortunately, Integra embraced her, rescuing her from her confusion. Ultimately, when Integra demanded to know who was behind it all, he suddenly self-combusted into ashes, leaving only the keyword Millennium. The Millennium organization sent synthetic vampires. Lieutenant Alhambra excited Alucard's urge for battle, and he, this time, might be able to satisfy Alucard fully. Since Hellsing headquarters last suffered an attack from the mysterious organization Millennium, Integra swore to eradicate this group. Eventually, she obtained information about Millennium from Commander Maxwell of Iscariot, Vatican Section 13, revealing they were remnants of defeated Nazi Germany from World War II. The Millennium Organization, now hidden in the Samba nation of South America, aimed to annihilate their enemies. Integra dispatched Alucard along with Seras and the mercenary Pip Vernaded to South America. Shortly after checking into the hotel, Alucard was attacked by Millennium. They sent Alhambra to confront Alucard head-on. He possessed a vampire's physique, bringing superhuman strength and speed. His sharp playing cards could easily penetrate almost any object, causing fierce explosions. In a high-speed movement, Alucard struck this man, but his body surprisingly disintegrated into playing cards. This was his card clone. His real body emerged from behind Alucard, striking Alucard and knocking him back. Then, with a snap of his fingers, playing cards surrounded the fallen Alucard, creating a ring of explosions. But Alucard had already moved past, rushing towards the hotel rooftop, with Alhambra in close pursuit. Seras arrived, firing wildly at Alhambra, whose rapidly orbiting cards defended him, even cutting artillery shells in half. Seeing this, Alucard released his own seal. His eyes turned crimson again, and his power surged. The gate of death had been opened for Alhambra. His legs were directly shattered by the bursting Alucard. Defeated in front of the unleashed Alucard, Alucard gripped his head, his bloodthirsty fangs exposed. From his blood, Alucard saw the true mastermind behind the Millennium Organization, the Major. This was an eerie old smoothbore gun in the hands of a woman with a devilish smile. A gunshot thundered, a magic bullet streaking out with a blue glow. If someone could predict its mysterious trajectory, even a speedily moving vampire could be killed in one shot. Her magic bullet possessed unstoppable, terrifying power, even destroying a supersonic jet at invisible altitudes. She was a lieutenant of the Millennium Organization's werewolf squad, the female vampire Winkle. To address the impending crisis, Commander Maxwell began purging the Vatican internally, executing the European bishops who colluded with the Millennium Organization. Under his orders, Paladin Anderson suppressed his own desire to kill Alucard and personally delivered the church's letter. Subsequently, the Queen convened all members of the Round Table, and discussions with the Vatican began on a strategy. Alucard also told them that during World War II, this German major conspired to create an army entirely composed of vampires, but his plan was thwarted by Alucard and Walter at the time. Now, they have formed Millennium's last battalion, ready to make a comeback. No sooner had the words been spoken than a cat-eared boy suddenly appeared in the grand hall of the Round Table meeting. He was Warrant Officer Schrodinger, sent by the Major. Facing everyone, the Major crazily declared that they were unworthy of being his targets. His true targets were the Rotten Kingdom and the Undying King, Alucard. To lure Alucard away from the foggy city and launch an attack, the Major had Winkle seize the Rotten Kingdom's aircraft carrier, planning to draw Alucard out to the sea. In order to approach the carrier, Alucard piloted a fighter jet, diving vertically from high above. Her magic bullets fired, knocking down the SR-71 Blackbird fighter jet. As the jet plummeted, Alucard broke his seals. To her senses, the terrifying aura only grew denser. Endless darkness enveloped her, and she was petrified with fear. Under the cross-shaped wreckage of the burning jet, Alucard appeared amid the roaring flames, approaching Winkle with the steps of death. At this moment, the soldiers of the Millennium Organization on the fleet unleashed a barrage of gunfire at Alucard. However, facing the unleashed power of Alucard, the flowers of annihilation bloomed for them. Winkle, terrified beyond measure, hid herself. Finally, under the moonlit night facing Alucard, she wiped away her tears and mustered her last courage. Dragging beams of blue magical bullets, she launched a torrential attack on Alucard. The unpredictable trajectory of her attacks splattered Alucard with blood everywhere. Alucard seemed powerless to retaliate, but a dangerous aura emanated from him. He caught the bullets with his clenched teeth directly. In the next second, the bullets shattered into blue light and dissipated. Winkle's last courage faded. She was snatched up by Alucard, who pierced her heart with an old-fashioned smoothbore gun. It was all over for her. She became part of Alucard's river of blood under the blood-red moonlight. Only Alucard, holding that old-fashioned smoothbore gun, remained. Elsewhere, the Major, aboard a Zeppelin, led the Avengers back to the mortal world under the blood-red moon, arriving over the foggy city. A crisis was nearing. Over the city, the Zeppelin launched endless missiles, screeching across the night sky to the horrified gazes of the people. Big Ben exploded, the Empire State Building exploded, and the entire world seemed to tremble. But for the Major, it was not enough. Facing the fire and smoke below in the foggy city, an army entirely composed of vampires was deployed. In the howling wind, fully armed, they plunged down one by one. These bloodthirsty demons, unable to suppress their bloodlust and ferocious nature, slaughtered every living being in sight, pouring death recklessly into the night of the foggy city. The city was engulfed in endless blood and fire. Meanwhile, inside the Zeppelin, the Major leisurely enjoyed his steak. More terrifying events occurred. All those innocently slain rose as ghouls. The entire foggy city fell. The city's defense forces were annihilated by the vampire army. In the command center headquarters of the Rotten Kingdom, alarms blared. Communication at the Royal Air Force Base headquarters was completely disrupted. It was only then that General Penwood of the Round Table meeting realized that war had come. Before he could react, an army stormed into the headquarters, having pledged their allegiance to the Millennium Organization for immortality. Seeing Integra in the command center was an unexpected surprise for them, but in reality, it was a nightmare, because Death himself, Walter, intervened. Their barrage of bullets was blocked by Walter's steel wires. In just a few seconds, they were all slaughtered by Walter. Integra urged General Penwood to evacuate, but he refused. Despite his profound fear, as a soldier, he chose not to retreat this time. Alone in the command center, General Penwood looked at the pistol Integra had left him before returning to the Hellsing headquarters. He recalled the first time he met Integra. She was just a child then, and under his watch, she had grown up. In the end, under the horrified gaze of the vampires storming the command center, he detonated the bomb, perishing alongside them. Meanwhile, Integra and Walter were frantically rushing back to the Hellsing headquarters. They stopped on a street where Walter sensed a terrifying presence at the end of the road. A formidable enemy had appeared. He got out of the car and urged Integra to flee at full speed, as he was no match for this powerful adversary in his current state. Alone, he faced the Millennium Organization's strongest trump card, Captain Belbrough, who effortlessly caught the supposedly indestructible wires with one hand. Integra, now alone, was discovered by the vampire army. Chased by vampires with superhuman speed, her speeding car broke down under intense gunfire, and she was eventually surrounded by vampires. Preparing for a last stand at that moment, countless biblical runes descended, and blessed bayonets pierced through the undead bodies of the vampires. The Vatican's strongest holy knight, Anderson, had arrived. Maxwell from the church hoped that the Hellsing and Millennium organizations would weaken each other, allowing the church to claim the final victory. However, since he considered the Hellsing organization a lifelong enemy, it was up to him to defeat them, even if it meant disobeying orders. Anderson turned to face the vampire army, his sword in hand, backed by the traitorous priests of Section 13. Fearless in the face of the vampires, they recited the Song of Iscariot, unafraid of death, and they annihilated all the vampires. As the Grim Reapers of Life, countless V1 modified missiles tore through the night sky towards the Hellsing headquarters. Millennium's major had sent a raiding force, but suddenly, precise cannon fire exploded them all, bursting into numerous fireworks in the sky. A-class vampire Zoran Blitz ordered the searchlights to be turned on, revealing the ferocious Seras, standing with her arms crossed, shouldering a massive 345-kilogram Barkanen semi-automatic cannon with a huge magazine strapped to her back. Only a vampire's superhuman constitution could handle such a fearsome weapon. Under the command of mercenary Captain Pip Bernadotte, Seras, with her crimson eyes blazing, raised the 3-meter-long cannon barrel. The black muzzle aimed at the Zeppelin in the sky, then like a torrent of steel, a barrage of fire, driven by the chain of ammunition, sprayed wildly from the barrel, carrying the vengeful desires of the spirits of the foggy city. Under the intense barrage, Lieutenant Zoran Blitz could only direct the severely damaged Zeppelin towards Seras. At a critical moment, the Barkanen's second attack mode was activated. The cannon barrel raised again, firing 2 wide-area suppression Vladimir explosive shells, carrying the scent of death towards the airship. In the sky, they detonated violently, and ultimately the airship crashed. But it wasn't over yet. They were vampires. Such an explosion was not enough to take them all out. The remaining vampires stood up one by one from the blazing fire. Under the leadership of Zoran Blitz, scythe in hand, they charged towards the Hellsing headquarters. The mercenaries in charge of defense were already prepared. They had laid a large number of landmines in advance. The rapidly advancing vampires were blown to pieces. The vampires stopped in horror. However, this was all within Pip Bernadotte's expectations. The mercenaries detonated the blessed bombs. The arrogant vampires, several more were sent skyward. Following the original plan, the battle-hardened mercenaries launched incendiary shells. Intense gunfire began to cover the vampire army comprehensively. The well-ambushed machine gun teams also started firing wildly. The vampires suffered heavy casualties. Just then, a ferocious pair of purple eyes opened. Zoran Blitz unleashed her Grade A vampire abilities. The mad whispers of demons began to sound. Under the blood moon, she placed her palm on the ground. Her muscular arms swelled. Dense runes moved about as if alive. Characters wriggled on the ground. And then, like worms, they piled up and swelled, eventually morphing into a vague, gigantic humanoid figure. After a moment of writhing, it transformed into the laughing face of Zoran Blitz. Fear descended upon all the mercenaries. Then the giant lieutenant raised her scythe and cleaved the headquarters in 2 with a single strike. The mercenaries suffered heavy losses. Faced with such a terrifying opponent, they lost their will to fight. Seras, as a fledgling vampire of Alucard, realized something was wrong. This was an illusion. Her eyes turned red, and the illusion finally dissipated. However, she couldn't awaken the mercenaries trapped in the illusion. She raised her cannon and frantically fired at the position of Lieutenant Zoran Blitz. Finally, she broke the lieutenant's illusion. But it was already too late. The swiftly moving vampire army bypassed the minefield from both sides and finally stormed into the gates of Hellsing. In front of these vampires, the mercenaries stood no chance. Facing the crisis, Pip Bernadotte gathered all the surviving mercenaries, ready to make their last stand. These dedicated mercenaries were prepared to make this place their grave, and Seras, as the ace, was sent out to seek a chance to kill these demons. Before she left, Pip Bernadotte attempted to steal a kiss from Seras, but did not succeed. In the distance, the ferocious Lieutenant Zoran Blitz laughed bizarrely. She was a powerful Grade A vampire under Major's command in the Millennium Organization, her ghastly, rune-covered face, her right palm glowing with a purple demonic eye, possessing eerie, illusory abilities that could evoke the most painful memories in the hearts of those caught in her spells. And she, like a devil, descended. The vampire army had already stormed into the Hellsing headquarters building. The mercenaries' gunfire was powerless. Every inch of Hellsing headquarters was quickly overrun by the invading vampires. Building B had fallen, and Pip Bernadotte and the remaining mercenaries held out at the last stronghold. But the sinisterly smiling Zoran Blitz had reached here with her vampires. Most of the mercenaries had lost their ability to fight. Suddenly, a rocket blasted through the entrance fortifications. The mercenaries were hit hard again. Just as they were about to fire another rocket, Seras finally arrived. The cannon fire from her cannon began to pour out furiously. All vampires, except for Zoran Blitz, were killed. Zoran Blitz launched her illusion again. A mesmerizing purple light covered the entire corridor. The illusionary barrier was activated. Seras was overwhelmed. Although she knew it was an illusion, her unquenched thirst made her unable to resist the full force of the vampire's illusion. Memories of her deep-seated sorrow surged forth. Memories of her lonely past living in the orphanage, watching helplessly as her parents were mercilessly killed. Overwhelmed by grief, she was unable to break free from these painful memories, and tears stopped her in her tracks. In that moment, Zoran Blitz took advantage of her vulnerability, approaching swiftly and severing her entire arm with a scythe, then knocking Seras to the ground with another strike. Zoran Blitz grabbed Seras by the head, blinding her eyes, embodying the madness of a bloodthirsty frenzy. Standing over the severely injured Seras, Zoran Blitz raised her scythe to deliver the killing blow. Just then, Pip Bernadotte, wielding a baseball bat, ambushed her from behind. Other mercenaries emerged and temporarily subdued Zoran Blitz. Pip Bernadotte hurriedly carried the blood-soaked Seras towards the defensive fortifications. Suddenly, a surviving vampire opened fire on him. Despite being shot multiple times, he did not fall. Carrying Seras, he made his way back step by step. However, it was not meant for them to reach their destination together. Pip was impaled by the recovered Zoran Blitz's scythe and finally fell, his blood flowing uncontrollably like a fountain. Weakened, he leaned against the wall. Struggling, Seras crawled towards him and finally reached his side. Pip Bernadotte lifted Seras, and this time, he finally kissed her. With a smile before dying, he said, "Don't cry, Seras. You are a strong girl. Eat me." Then he could hold on no longer and collapsed. Blinded, Seras groped and embraced him, sobbing mournfully. Memories of their time together kept flooding back, and her tears flowed incessantly. The terrifying Zoran Blitz, with reinforcements of vampires, closed in on them. With no way out, she launched another illusion. Was it all over? Seras caressed the face of the deceased Pip Bernadotte and began to suck his blood. The blood around her began to flow back into her body. For him, she awakened. Her crimson eyes opened, and her blood-red energy transformed into the arm she had lost. As Zoran Blitz watched in horror, the illusionary barrier was shattered. Seras charged towards her blood enemies. Her moment of vengeance had come. All the reinforcements of vampires were annihilated by her. Zoran Blitz was also pinned to the ground by her hand. Even as she launched another illusion, in Seras's heart, her memories were already filled with Pip Bernadotte. She had become one with him, his blood mingling with hers. Finally, Seras slammed Zoran Blitz against the wall, killing her. After everything ended, Seras took one last look at the deceased Pip Bernadotte. Blood-red energy transformed into wings, carrying her towards the foggy city. Because she had promised Pip Bernadotte to bring despair and death to those innocent vampires. He had been the prince of the Wallachian Principality, the powerful commander of the Wallachian Royal Knights. He had fought for his faith but was cruelly betrayed by fate. Eventually, he renounced his faith, feasting on blood to become the king of vampires, turning blood into the currency of a hellish song. 500 years later, he chanted the sealing words of the Ripley Scrolls. The blood began to surge and spread, and the departed spirits appeared in the endless river of death. These were the Janissaries of the Ottoman Empire and the Wallachian Royal Knights. The Type 0 Death River was activated. The night wind, carrying the scent of blood and the smell of burning, blew from across the river. Maxwell, intoxicated by the wind filled with blood and fire, believed it to be divine retribution against Protestant heretics. To reclaim the corrupted nation from the hands of heretics and monsters, the Vatican's Ninth Crusade was launched. The sword brethren of the Teutonic Order, the Knights of Calatrava, and the Knights of Malta, donned in their church's crusader robes, stood solemnly in the night wind. They knelt solemnly before Maxwell, newly appointed by the Pope as the Archbishop and commander of the crusade. Then all the crusaders shouted the slogan, Amen. With faith and glory, they lined up and entered the armed transport aircraft. This time, all heretics would be destroyed under their weapons.